So good to have you join us today. Hello, I'm Jung, and you've tuned into Business Daily. We have a lot lined up for you today, so let's start with some of the day's highlights. President Park Geun-hye addresses the country's lawmakers on next year's budget, jobs, and economic reforms during a speech on Tuesday. Will Korea be able to reach its target of 3.1% on the back of higher growth figures it saw in the third quarter? We'll sit down with an expert to talk about Korea's GDP and what it all means for the domestic economy. We begin with President Park Geun-hye's parliamentary address on next year's budget plan that happened earlier today. It comes as the National Assembly began its budgetary review on Monday and as Korea deals with external and internal pressures to keep growing. Our Eunice Kim is on the story for us today.
It has been a year of challenges, from the global economic slowdown, emphasis on China's economy, to Korea's own MERS outbreak that crunched the domestic appetite to spend. Despite this, President Park Geun-hye said the country has been making strides in the government's three-year innovation plan, punctuated by reforms and deregulation that were laid out in 2015.
내년은 우리 경제의 개혁과 혁신이 한층 심화되고 혁신의 노력들이 경제 체질을 바꾸어 성과가 구체화되는 중요한 한 해가 될 것입니다.
High on the mind of Korea's leader was economic revitalization by way of job creation with an eye on the youth. The budget for job creation next year is set to expand 12.8% on year to a record sum of $13.9 billion. The budget for youth jobs was raised by 20% to boost training and preparatory programs. Explaining that structural issues are very much part of present problems, President Park said her administration's targeted 4 reforms in the public sector, labor, finance, and education must be completed, no matter how exacting the task may be. She also reassured progress is being made. Starting next year, the government will save $1.3 billion annually thanks to unprecedented pension reforms for public officials. Tipping the hat to reforms in the financial sector, President Park said firms with promising technologies are seeing 4 times more funding channeled their way in the past half year. But President Park emphasized urgent changes need to come by way of the country's lawmakers.
우리 경제의 활력을 불어넣고 청년들에게 일자리를 주기 위한 중요한 경제 활성화 법안들이 수년째 처리되지 못하고 아직까지 국회에 계류되어 있습니다.
She urged the divided parliament to move on passing labor reform bills, a service industry bill that would create upwards of 690,000 jobs, and ratifying key free trade pacts with Vietnam and China. Eunice Kim, Business Daily.
Meanwhile, consumer sentiment in Korea improved for the 4th straight month in October, rebounding from the economic fallout of the recent outbreak of the Middle East respiratory syndrome. The Bank of Korea says its consumer sentiment index came to 105 this month, up 2 points from the previous month. A reading above 100 indicates that optimists outnumber pessimists about economic conditions. The index has been on a steady rise since it tumbled below the benchmark 100 in June, when fears about the MERS outbreak were at their peak. The latest figures show that Koreans had a more positive outlook on income and spending, but they still have a gloomy view about the future of the local economy. Korea's top 3 shipbuilders are expected to suffer combined losses of over 10 trillion won. Now that's roughly $8.8 billion. Their losses come mainly from construction delays of offshore facilities as well as order cancellations. According to industry sources, Hyundai Heavy Industries, Samsung Heavy Industries, and Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering have suffered a combined loss of $7.8 billion since 2010 from facility projects. In the first half of the year alone, the 3 shipbuilders posted a combined net loss of $3.3 billion. Korea's growth rebound in the third quarter is prompting some experts to take another look at their annual growth forecasts. Can the country reach its growth target this year despite sluggish exports? Take a look.
Seoul, earlier this year, had set out to achieve 3.1% growth for its economy. But that goal may not be attainable despite an uptick in its third quarter GDP growth of 1.2%, after having stayed below 1% for 5 consecutive quarters. Many global think tanks and investment banks had put their growth outlook for Korea in the upper 2% range, citing sliding exports and weak domestic consumption. And last week, the Korean government also said it may have been too optimistic about the country's growth forecast. Finance Minister Geunhye said that it may be hard for Korea to achieve its growth target this year due to the low contributions exports are making towards overall expansion in light of slow global trade. This was the first time that the minister openly said that Korea's growth rate will fall short of its target despite stimulus measures implemented to boost the economy. So what should the Korean government do in order to maximize effects seen in the third quarter, while exports continue to weigh down the economy?
And to tell us more about this, we're now joined by Professor Yang Joon from the Catholic University of Korea in the studio with us today. So good to see you, Professor.
Happy to be here.
All right, so let's first break down those GDP growth figures that came out last week, actually. That number showed that the Korean economy grew by 1.2% on quarter in the third quarter, rising to a 5-year high. What factors do you think could have played a part in this?
Okay, well, there was a combination of very good factors. The biggest factor there was that consumption grew by 1.1%. Now, this a lot of people attribute this rise to the bounce back from the MERS effect that we had in the second quarter. We had so low in consumption that it had to bounce back.
Right.
There were also some extra holidays this year, most notably the Independence Day in August, which was originally, it fell on Sunday, but they decided to give an extra holiday, so that apparently had some positive effect on consumption as well. What's been more interesting to me, though, is that construction investment went up a lot. It went up by 4%.
Wow.
So that was also a very good contributing factor, and equipment investment also went up by about 2%. So those are the factors which played into this relatively high GDP growth this quarter.
But then now we want to know what factors had a negative impact on growth.
Okay, well, exports are still not doing very well. It fell by 0.2%.
It actually fell.
Yeah, and imports went up by 1.3%, so that has a negative effect on the GDP, at least in numbers, but that's not all bad news. Sometimes imports, when they rise, it indicates that people are more confident in spending their money. And I think the key to maintaining this higher GDP growth is to spot consumption, and the fact that we had a bit of a higher import numbers may indicate that we may be recovering.
Well, we had some good news coming out of the Bank of Korea today, or the data from the Bank of Korea, which showed that consumer sentiment improved in October for 4th consecutive months. Does this tell us anything?
Okay, well, that's good news because that indicates that people will spend more, hopefully, in the next quarter. I think this recovery has to be driven by domestic consumption because, well, typically we look at investment and exports as engines of growth, at least in the short term. And because of the global economy right now, we really cannot count on exports rising. And investment, well, investment tends to depend on how companies see the future. And so higher consumption hopefully will make the companies more optimistic and make them invest more.
All right, well, but going back to third quarter figures, despite the uptick, global think tanks and investment banks still say that Korea's growth for this year will slide even more.
Yes. Well, also they've been lowering the projections for next year, so that's a sad bit of news. But I think partially they're not counting on next year being particularly better than this year. So Korea will. Well, the government's been counting on a higher growth, but Bank of Korea seems to be confident only to about 2.7% level, which is their projection. And I think most think tanks, most international investment banks think that things are not going to get really a whole lot better next year. On the other hand, sort of a lukewarm good news there is that it's probably not going to get worse either. So hopefully we can maintain the momentum that we have for most of next year.
But then, you know, the Korean government, like we saw in the report, has the 3.1 growth target, which do you think we'll be able to reach?
It's going to be very difficult. If I was betting, then I would not bet on it. But the Bank of Korea seems to think that we can achieve their projection, which is 2.7%. If we want to achieve a 3.1% growth this year, it's not impossible, but it'll be very, very difficult because we'll have to do better in the fourth quarter than we did in the third quarter. And a lot of people, a lot of analysts believe that some of the factors which made the third quarter growth very high will not be around for next quarter. For example, the extra holidays we had, as well as the bounce back from MERS, that's not going to be around next quarter.
All right, then how do these growth figures affect foreign investors and where they decide to put in their money? Okay, well, higher growth does mean the more likelihood of higher profitability for Korean firms, so that will probably help attract foreign investment. What I'm hoping, though, is that this will hopefully make the domestic consumers more optimistic about their future, because I think the key to growth here for the next year is going to be consumption rather than investment. I think if consumption grows, then investment will follow, whether domestic or foreign. But if the consumption dies down, because we cannot hope for that much in the export side, if we don't get a lot of increased consumption, then we probably won't get a lot of increased investment either. All right, we're now into the fourth quarter and 2016 is coming up very soon. What factors do you think we should look out for that could have a significant impact on Korea's future growth? Okay, well, typically if you look at the GDP, then the biggest factor is consumption. And hopefully they'll try to maintain this positive momentum that we had this quarter. Investment, as I said, if consumption rises, then investment will probably follow as well. I think the big factor is, well, we cannot really count on exports all that much. Export picture is not looking good next year as well. So best we can hope for is probably about the same as this year. Given that, a lot of things are going to depend on Korea's monetary policy and fiscal policy. I tend to think that the president said this morning that she'll strengthen the welfare policies next year. Hopefully that'll make people more confident and spend more. Monetary policy, the interest rates, well, I think there's a little bit more room to lower interest rates, but the monetary policy has not been very effective this year. So it should be combined with comprehensive fiscal policy so that it'll have a more effective effect on consumption, hopefully. And hopefully we'll maintain this momentum that we had in the third quarter. All right. Thank you so much for your insight today, Professor.
Thank you.
The head of Korea's financial watchdog has called on local banks to take preemptive action against highly indebted and unprofitable firms dubbed zombie companies. The governor of the Financial Supervisory Service, Jung said it's important to identify such ailing companies through adequate screening procedures. By doing so, he said banks can force unhealthy companies out of the market and let financial resources move in a virtuous cycle. There are an estimated 3,200 zombie firms here in Korea, which account for roughly 15% of total listed firms. Insiders warn that if the country doesn't step up efforts to deal with the rising number of ailing companies and mounting corporate debt, which currently stands at over $45 billion, these could become a risk for the economy nationwide. Many people here in Korea have so far preferred jobs that involve sitting in front of an office desk, as opposed to those that require technical skill sets. But a recent survey is revealing a dramatic change in that perception. Our Jung has more.
Song Shin-gun is the president and master technician at a mid-sized firm that manufactures sheet metals of automobiles. His company may not be large, but he says it's likely to post over $30 million again in sales this year.
Experience and knowledge are essential when it comes to gaining know-how of technical skills.
With Korea's rapid economic development and a shift in the country's economic landscape from manufacturing to information and technology, many have typically preferred white-collar jobs over those that involve manual labor. But according to a recent survey by the Human Resources Development Service of Korea on over 4,900 Koreans aged 20 or older, people's perceptions are changing. The survey shows 78.2% regret not learning a specific trade in the past, while 74% said they would pursue a path as a technician if they could choose their jobs again. 76.1% said they would even recommend the option for their children. Some of the reasons behind this are better pay in the future, supported by 30% of those surveyed. 27.4% think these jobs can lead to easier employment, and this comes as youth unemployment remains a significant problem, with the jobless rate of young people standing at nearly 8% as of last month.
It's not that there's a lack of jobs. I think people have overly high standards. As for me, I came to this company on good terms and have no regrets about it.
While blue-collar professions still come with a relatively negative impression of being physically demanding and of lower social status, experts say a greater change in awareness is necessary, along with the government support to expand opportunities for retraining in the workforce. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
That's all I have for you today. Check back with us tomorrow at the same time, same place for your Business Daily. And as always, thanks so much for watching.